The trees in Hurtgen don't just stand, they watch. Silent, tall, soaked in blood and fog. On November 12th, 1944, we weren't soldiers, we were shadows, lost in mud, choking on smoke, waiting for something worse than death. They told us the enemy was evil. But that night, under a shattered sky, I saw kindness from the last man I expected.
They told us war would make men out of us, that by the time we came home, we'd have earned our stripes, our stories, our medals, and maybe, if we were lucky, a seat at some bar where we'd drink free till we forgot what we did to get them. What they didn't tell us was that sometimes war doesn't make men, it breaks boys. The Hurtgen Forest wasn't even on most maps they handed us, just a name, a patch of trees near the German border. They said we'd be through in days, said it was a formality. What they didn't say was that it would become one of the longest and most senseless battles of the war, that more men would die from the weather than from bullets, that the trees themselves would kill us, that mercy would become the rarest thing in the world. I remember the first time I smelled that place. Earth soaked in blood and rain, rot and cordite, moldy bark and something else I still can't name. Something that smells like fear after it's been sitting too long in a man's chest. The canopy above us let in no light, just shadow. Just the echo of shell fire bouncing between trunks like a cruel joke played on loop. I was 19 years old, farm kid from Minnesota. Could still feel my mother's kiss on my temple from the train station. Could still see the way she tucked Danny's scarf into his collar and told him to stay close to me. He was 17, lied about his age to enlist. Said if I was going to war, he wouldn't stay home milking cows while I faced hell alone. My little brother who still had a milk mustache in his enlistment photo. He followed me through basic, through France, through Belgium. He'd never fired a shot in anger until Hurtgen. And by then, none of us had room left for anger, just orders, just wet socks, shaky hands, and the whisper of prayers muttered between shell blasts. November 12th. That date is carved into the back of my skull. It was his birthday. We were pinned somewhere near Hill 400, surrounded by trees and fog and the kind of silence that comes right before the worst kind of noise. Shells began falling around noon, but they didn't stop. Trees exploded into splinters. Whole squads disappeared without screams. You never heard the one that got you. Just the wind, then the flash, then nothing. Danny was 3 steps behind me when the mortar hit. I turned and he was gone. Just gone from sight, swallowed by smoke and mud. My boots slipped as I ran. My helmet was gone. My ears rang like someone had shoved a church bell into my skull. Then I saw him. He was curled behind a fallen tree, gasping like a fish on the dock. His hands clutched his stomach. There was blood everywhere. Not the bright kind, the kind that still has hope, but black, thick blood that already smells like death. I dropped to my knees. I pressed my hands into the wound. I remember screaming for a medic, over and over, but no one came. They were dead, or busy, or too far to hear me over the bombs. His eyes fluttered open, and he looked at me. Really looked at me. He wasn't scared, not anymore. Just calm, too calm. "It's bad, huh?" he whispered. That voice, that same voice that used to ask me for one more bedtime story when we were kids, that voice that cracked when he tried to sing in church. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Then I heard a noise behind me. I spun around with my rifle, ready to kill whatever came next. And there he was, a figure in gray, helmet low, arms raised, a red cross on his sleeve. A German medic. I tightened my finger on the trigger. I had every right to shoot him. He was the enemy. He was what we were told to hate, to kill, to erase. But then, he did something I didn't expect. He dropped to his knees, crawled slowly toward Danny, never broke eye contact. His hands moved like water, steady, clean, practiced. He opened his kit, pulled out gauze, morphine, a syringe. And then he looked at me. Not with fear, not with hate. Just a look that said, "Please, let me." And I did. I don't even remember lowering my rifle. It happened. Something in me gave way. Something in me said, this man isn't the enemy. Not right now, not here, not with Danny bleeding out in the dirt. The German worked quickly, silently. I watched his fingers, how gentle they were, like he was patching up his own brother. Danny groaned once, then his body went limp. Not dead, just the morphine, I prayed. And then, something impossible happened. The German took Danny's hand in his own, and he didn't let go. Night fell, the temperature dropped, artillery lit up the sky like angry stars, but the German didn't move. He didn't run back to his lines. He stayed, crouched beside my brother, humming something I didn't understand. Maybe a lullaby, maybe a prayer, maybe it was just the sound a man makes when he knows death is watching. He held Danny's hand until the sun rose, and when he saw my brother had passed in his sleep, quietly, painlessly, like a boy dreaming of home, he closed his eyes, whispered something in German. Then he turned to me, and he wept. I never saw him again. I never even learned his name. But I carry his mercy in my chest like a medal no one can pin. He gave my brother peace, gave me something I didn't know I needed. Proof that even here, even in this forest where God had long since gone silent, kindness still lived in human hands. Not American hands, not German hands, just human hands. By the end of this video, I'll show you how battlefield compassion at Hurtgen Forest, November 12, 1944, can heal both the giver and the world we return to.
I didn't speak for hours after dawn. I couldn't. My voice stayed locked somewhere behind my teeth, buried under a weight I didn't know how to carry. The fog had lifted from the forest, but not from my chest. I sat there with Danny's body growing cold beside me, my hands still stained with his blood, my knees soaked in the earth that tried to claim him. And in the space where war had been, there was only silence. No orders, no hatred, just the quiet memory of a stranger's hands. How gently they moved, how long they stayed. When our patrol finally found us, they thought I'd gone shell-shocked. Maybe I had. They radioed it in, zipped Danny into a tarp, and told me to get moving. But I couldn't stop thinking about him, the German medic. I wanted to ask if anyone had seen him, if anyone knew his name, if he'd made it back to his lines. But what could I even say? He held my brother's hand? That's not a report. That's not intel. That's not war. But it was everything. It took 2 days before I was back in action. They pushed us north toward Kleinhau. The terrain didn't change, just more mud, more trees, more boys with blank stares and dirty fingernails clutching rifles like they were crucifixes. At night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Danny's face, not when he died, but when he was a kid, chasing fireflies in the cornfield behind the barn. Kept hearing his laugh, that goofy, high-pitched bark he tried to deepen when girls were around. And in every dream, just behind him, stood the medic, not speaking, just there, watching over him.
The men in my unit never asked about what happened that night. Maybe they knew better. Maybe they saw it in my eyes that if they tugged on that thread, the whole thing would come apart. But something changed in me. I stopped seeing Germans as monsters, stopped flinching every time I saw that gray uniform and the crosshairs. I started seeing people. Not always, not perfectly. War doesn't let you be soft forever. But in moments, between bursts of fire, between the screams, I started noticing small things. A wounded enemy soldier crawling toward a photograph, half buried in the mud. A boy no older than Danny shivering with a fever behind enemy lines. A white flag tied to a broken rifle flapping in the cold wind like a ghost trying to go home. And in those moments, I made a choice. Sometimes I shot. Sometimes I didn't. Sometimes I gave away a ration or tore a sleeve from my own coat to wrap someone's wounds. Sometimes I just looked away and let them live. Not because I was brave, not because I was noble, because I remembered. I remembered a stranger who crossed no man's land not to kill, but to comfort. Because somewhere, in some village I'd never see, that medic had a brother too. And maybe, just maybe, someone had spared him once. The war dragged on. We lost more ground than we gained. By the time the Battle of the Bulge rolled around, I was a shadow of the boy who'd stepped into that forest, but I carried Danny with me, and the medic too, not just in memory, but in the way I moved, the way I fought, the way I stopped fighting when the moment called for it. Years later, when I finally made it home, my mother asked me what happened to Danny. I told her he died brave. I didn't tell her he died in my arms. I didn't tell her about the blood or the screams, but I told her this. He wasn't alone. Someone was with him. Someone kind. She cried. Not the way I expected. Not loud, just soft tears like rain on dry ground. Then she asked the question I hadn't dared to voice. Who was he? And I said, the man who saved my soul.
The years passed, but the forest never left me. Not the smell of wet bark and burning flesh, not the weight of Danny's last breath on my shoulder, not the memory of that German medic's hands. Steady, warm, human. I tried to go back to living, built fences, raised a family, planted wheat instead of flags. But some nights, when the wind hit just right, I was back there, back in that cold trench, watching a man I was supposed to hate cradle the boy I loved more than life itself. I once wrote a letter I never sent, to the Red Cross in Germany. I didn't have a name, just the memory of a face, of soft German words murmured through the dark, of a man who stayed when he could have run, who chose mercy in a place built from murder. I wanted to thank him, not for saving Danny, he couldn't, but for saving the part of me that might have died with him. Because it's easy to pull the trigger when you're told to. It's harder to put your weapon down, to reach out, to kneel in the dirt beside your enemy and choose kindness instead of vengeance. That's what he did. And because of him, I've spent my life trying to do the same. Not always succeeding, but always trying. The war ended, the medals rusted, the names faded. But that moment in the forest, the hand he held, the silence he honored, that never left me. Because battles end, kindness doesn't. It keeps marching, and now it's my turn to carry it.